So hello, everyone. We're going to give an extra minute just for our attendees to sign in before we get started. Okay, so I guess in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get our session started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. This is the latest in our post-secondary pathway series. My name is Marlena Everett, and I'm the Director of Higher Education here at the Hunt Institute, a national nonprofit founded by four-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt. We work across the education continuum to convene and inform policymakers on education policy issues from prenatal to post-secondary. And I'm excited today to welcome you to today's session, during which we will discuss the scope of gender pay disparity and elaborate on promising practices in promoting the economic empowerment of women and non-binary individuals. So as you log on, please drop your name, your title, and organization in the chat to let us know where you're joining from. And also, I have a few housekeeping items before we get started. Our team has turned on closed captioning, and it should be live on your screen. If you experience any difficulties, please let a member of the Hunt Institute know in the chat box. Additionally, today's session will be recorded and publicized after the webinar. And after this session, the Hunt Institute will send the recording along with key takeaways to all attendees. And lastly, we will have time for Q&A at the end of today's session, so please submit your questions using the Q&A feature. And with that, I'm honored to be joined by three incredible panelists. We have Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton with the state of Illinois here today. Thank you so much for joining us, Lieutenant Governor. We also have Samantha Granados. She's our partnerships manager at Latinx Ed. And Dr. Jill Yavorski. She's the Associate Professor of Sociology and Organizational Science at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. Thank you so much all for joining us. So we will get started today. Let's see here. I'm going to introduce Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton and give a brief overview of her background. She is serving as the Lieutenant Governor for Illinois. She's the 48th Lieutenant Governor, and she brings a visionary leadership to more than a dozen councils, commissions, boards, and agencies as chair or executive liaison, including the Illinois Council on Women and Girls, the Governor's Rural Affairs Council, the Military Economic Development Committee, and the Rivers of Illinois Coordinating Council. Her portfolio also includes overseeing the administration's Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, chairing the board of the Restore, Reinvest, and Renew program, and leading a range of office initiatives that address the needs of Illinoisans. Lieutenant Governor Stratton is the former chair of the National Lieutenant Governors Association, and she is actively engaged with the Chicago Network, the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and the Links Incorporated. Welcome, Governor Stratton.
Well, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, she, her pronouns. And first of all, let me just say to you, Dr. Everett, thank you so much for moderating today's conversation. I just want to acknowledge the great work of the Hunt Institute and all that the Hunt Institute does for elevating education policy and really prioritizing our collective access to knowledge. I'm a Hunt Cain Fellow, and I'm so grateful to continue learning from the Institute. And we've had some really terrific partnerships with the state of Illinois that has really helped how I advocate for all Illinois residents. Of course, I want to acknowledge and thank my fellow panelists, Samantha Granados, as well as Dr. Jill Yavorski. Thank you for sharing your wisdom today, and I look forward to this conversation. And thank you to everyone who's joining. I see a lot of attendees who are putting their information in the chat, and I look forward to some great questions later. Did you want me to get started, or do you want to introduce all of the panelists first?
No, we can go ahead and get started with your first question, Lieutenant Governor.
Okay.
So thank you for those kind words and for joining us today. Can you tell us about your recent work on the We Thrive initiative and how it uplifts women's economic empowerment?
Well, absolutely. First of all, let me just say I'm so thrilled that in December of 2023, my office launched an incredibly exciting initiative called We Thrive. And We Thrive is really dedicated to empowering women all across the state of Illinois to financial wholeness and well-being. As I mentioned, we launched in December. We brought together leaders from women serving organizations from all across the state, from different industries, different parts of Illinois, a diverse group of women to really talk about what are the challenges that are really barriers to women feeling confident about our money. And that's really at the core of economic empowerment. It's you feel empowered when you feel confident. And unfortunately, for so many of us, we never learned a lot of the lessons growing up that really could help us have that confidence. And when we look at this, sort of status of things today in the workplace and lots of other areas, we still don't always have that confidence because we're still not often at the table and a part of the conversations where decisions are being made. And so we often talk about the wage gap, and that's an obvious example of inequity. And we know that when we think about the wage gap, that it is even more stark when it comes to Black and brown women. But we really want to get to sort of the root of what is happening, that we are seeing these sort of systemic disparities throughout women's lives. Education is certainly something that gives us a pathway to economic empowerment. But I also want to think about some of the less obvious things that are impacting women's financial freedom. And so, as I said, education is one piece. But what else is happening with women so that when we think about what we need to do around education policy, we're also thinking about it within the context of what else is happening. So let me mention a couple of those areas. Let's start with, for example, retirement. And we know that life expectancy often impacts how much money is needed for retirement. And on average, American women live 3 years longer than men do. Women are, by the way, 80% more likely to live in poverty during retirement. In fact, according to a report by Goldman Sachs, 50% of women say that they're behind in saving for retirement compared to 35% of men. So even as we think about the trajectory and where we want to be in those last years or after we finish working, women are often going to be in a position that is not as strong economically. In terms of personal finance, 94% of women believe that they will at some point be personally responsible for their finances, but only 48% of women feel confident about their finances and 28% feel empowered to take action. So again, that goes to what I talked about earlier, that we know that there are going to be moments that we are going to have to be primarily responsible for what's happening with our households, but we don't always know what to do or how to do it, and don't always have the confidence. When it comes to debt, women hold 2/3 of all national student debt. So when we talk about education, we have to talk about it in the context of affordability and how to make sure that we're not saddled with debt, because having that debt throughout our lives and it being very difficult to pay down can have a tremendous impact on our ability to feel economically empowered. And then even when it comes to investment in women-owned businesses, we know that women and men are applying for financing at similar rates as small business owners, but on average, women business owners often seek smaller amounts, and they're less likely to get the full amount that they are requesting. And then finally, I just want to talk about some of the medical impacts. Women at 43% are much more likely than men at 32% to report that they delayed seeking much needed medical treatment over the past year due to some kind of, because of the cost of it. And so what you will see is that when we talk about how women can thrive, and that's what the We Thrive initiative is all about, Yes, it is about creating more pathways to economic opportunity. Yes, it is about educational attainment, but it's also recognizing that even as we do those things, there are so many other societal barriers that keep us from being at a place where we can feel confident about our money. And so throughout this year, through the We Thrive initiative, I'll be hosting small group discussions called We Chats to better understand the issues facing women, the different lived experiences women have, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural communities, regardless of what corner of the state they might live. And really just our goal is to share existing state resources. We don't need to start something new. We need to help women find the information that they can feel empowered. And so we're going to create a centralized place for women to get that information and make sure that they know that they are not alone. And I'll just finally close by saying, as women, when I think about economic empowerment and what we can do, and even the We Thrive initiative, women are communal. We like to do this work together. We like to feel supported. We like to be able to have safe spaces to talk about these issues. And when you walk into a room where you are the only or one of the few or the first, it can make it hard. And if we're going to open up doors for all women, we need to come together and do this work collectively.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for sharing those statistics. The statistics are quite alarming and really highlight the importance of financial literacy and economic empowerment for women. So thank you so much for starting the conversation off with that. I will turn to introduce our next panelist, Samantha Granados. She has a very diverse background here. She holds a master's in public health from UNC's Gillings School of Global Public Health and a Bachelor of Arts in Evolutionary Anthropology from Duke University, and is deeply committed to advancing socioeconomic, educational, and health equity. Driven by her journey as the daughter of Mexican immigrants, she offers a nuanced perspective on the pivotal role of educational attainment in fostering women's economic empowerment. As partnerships manager at Latinx Ed, Samantha skillfully navigates intersectional partnerships, enhances stakeholder engagement through data visualization, and strategically guides investments for bilingual resources and bicultural representation. With a dedication to fostering the inclusivity and upward mobility, Samantha stands as a catalyst for equity and empowerment in diverse communities, exemplifying the impactful contributions first-generation Latino college graduates can make to their communities and beyond. Samantha, it is a great way to have you here with us. We are so excited to have you on this panel. Your question is, what does your work at Latinx Ed look like, and how does it center equity and economic empowerment for Latina women?
Thank you so much, Dr. Marlena. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I must say it is a gift to be working at Latinx Ed. Again, my name is Samantha Granados, and I'm the Partnerships Manager at Latinx Ed. Latinx Ed is a statewide nonprofit that collectively invests in the growth and well-being of Latinx leaders, as well as education advocates, in order to transform how education systems improve the post-secondary outcomes of Latinx students and their families. As partnerships manager, my role is all about how we build sustainable and reciprocal partnerships all across North Carolina. I can't help but think back to 2021 when I first joined amidst the pandemic and all of that uncertainty. But it was such an honor to join as we were kicking off the Somos NC statewide listening tour, which has helped inform and improve a lot of our programs and service offerings. To tell you more about that, it was a very beautiful and intentional community-led effort to not only recruit and research, but also re-energize the Latinx community all across the state. I come from Los Angeles, California, and have been here for a beautiful 10 years. And this opportunity was one that really cemented my love for North Carolina and just highlighted the power of our community. We are here in numbers, and even though it might feel like we're not, it's because we're scattered right all over the state. And so it was my pleasure to be able to help build some of those bridges and connect incredible leaders all across the state. If you want to learn more, that tour did culminate in a beautiful love letter or report for our community and our allies, which you can find on our website. But really, this was the beginning of asking a lot of tough questions and helping to create solutions with the youth, men and women that were excited to join. It really came as a surprise and didn't come as a surprise that people from all walks of life were really interested in joining in this conversation. I met over 250 people across 43 counties that were just eager to talk about how we can improve success for Latina students as well as their educators. And it has shown us so much. We actually took away 4 main barriers that came up repeatedly and have now used that to strengthen our Latinx Ed Fellowship to better offer the supports that people really need. And so I'll tell you briefly, it's our ABCs and Ds. A lot of our community was saying that there is an absence of representation that is multilingual, multicultural. There are barriers to access, especially for those who are undocumented. There is cultural isolation, as well as disinvestment in Latinx education and supports overall. So with all of that in mind, we tried to increase, navigational supports for our community. We tried to cultivate spaces to learn and practice things that are maybe tried and true, or things that are maybe more innovative, because we're seeing a lot of unique needs and we need to respond just as creatively to address some of these needs. So it's been wonderful. One of the things I think that makes our work so powerful is that we see those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So what that translates for me as is that it really pays off to pay attention to and invest in those that are already available and presently serving Latino families, Spanish speakers, or other immigrant communities, right? So it's not only a good practice, but really such a value add if you're able to work on increasing the cultural competency, the leadership confidence, and the networks of support that really are what continue to sustain and motivate people to do work that can be very challenging, right? So we also love that we have about 76% of people in our fellowship now, after 3 years, that identify as women. And our board and our team actually reflects that as well. And so we're just celebrating the fact that we see so many Latina women really at the forefront of creating and cultivating some of these much needed changes, whether it's at the system level or even the personal level, right? Because it's an ongoing journey to be able to respond appropriately to our changing landscape, our changing demographics, and do so in such a way that not only fulfills you, but also uplifts others, right, in the work. So that's just a little bit about me and Latinx Ed, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samantha. I will just have to say and applaud Latinx Ed for all of the wonderful work you do across the state to improve success and access for Latinx students. I'll tip my hat off to you. Thank you so much for all that hard work you do. We will move on to Dr. Jill Yavorski. I will introduce her. She is an associate professor of sociology and organizational science at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And she received her PhD from the Ohio State University in sociology. Her research focuses on U.S. labor market patterns by gender, race, and class, workplace inequality, bias and discrimination, and divisions of labor among parents. Her research has been published in leading social science journals, including American Sociological Review, Social Forces, and American Journal of Sociology, and supported by national funding institutes such as the National Science Foundation. Additionally, her work has garnered widespread media attention from leading media outlets such as the NPR Marketplace, New York Times, Time, Fortune, Forbes, among others. So Dr. Yaworsky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and to be among such a great panel. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So your question here is, despite the rise of women pursuing post-secondary education, the economic inequality between women and men persists. So what are some causes of this, and how can state and federal level policymakers address those inequalities?
So this is a great question. So yes, there are really stark economic inequalities still that persist. We know that women make about 83 cents to men's dollar. And that is really kind of a simplification of what the gender inequality gap actually is, because the wealth gap is much larger than that. That statistic does not include individuals who are not employed. And we know that there's a number of different barriers that women face in entering the labor market and staying employed. So generally, the way that I like to think about gender inequality and the barriers that women still face, I put it in 4 buckets. So the first is entry to labor market. And maintaining continuous work time in the market. So we see large changes after childbirth in women's employment. So even though a large proportion and a majority of women still work after childbirth, this is the biggest change when we see women either reducing their work hours or dropping out of the labor market. And a lot of people might think or have beliefs that women are choosing to drop out because this is what they want to do. They want to spend more time. And many women, of course, this may be true for a sect of women. And we see this particularly amongst religious sects. But what we know is that the conditions around women's employment and the family conditions very much influence whether or not they stay employed after childbirth. So we know that in states that offer more affordable and universally available childcare, women's employment is much higher than the states in which childcare is largely unaffordable or which the school times are incompatible with work times. So Leah Ruppiner did a really great statewide analysis that looked at the variation in women's employment by the times of schools, and they found that when schools got out earlier, so like 1:30 or 2 p.m., women were much more likely to drop out of the labor market compared to the states in which school times ended at 3 p.m., 3:30 p.m. So already we see some statewide variation just based on school times. We also know that when women have access to paid family leave, they're much more likely to return to the labor market. Other research suggests that when their spouses do not work long work hours, so when their spouses work 40 hours rather than 50 hours, they're much more likely to stay in employment, suggesting, these patterns within families also can push women out of the labor market. Also, an interesting thing, despite that women's employment dipped during the pandemic, a lot of women were pushed out in part because they tend to take on larger care responsibilities at home. And we saw that exacerbated in the pandemic. The one group that actually saw an uptick in employment were women with small or young children, infants, so 0 to 2-year-olds. And this is because they had greater access to remote work. And so this is Claudia Golden's really comprehensive work on employment, and the pandemic showed this, that was the one exception in which women actually saw a slight increase because of the greater access. This is particularly for highly educated women. So women who have a college degree or higher. Those are the individuals most likely to have access to remote work. So this is all to say that when we have policies, organizational practices that support women's employment and support dual earner couples, we see that women by and large are employed and work full time. So the other barrier that is persistent for maintaining or gaining more in gender equality is occupational segregation. So this is the pattern by which men and women tend to work in different and unequal jobs. So men tend to work in male-dominated jobs and women tend to work in female-dominated jobs. And so a lot of people, when they think about gender wage gaps, they think about the gender wage gap between men and women doing the same job. That's important and that exists, and there is discrimination and bias, but a potentially even larger disparity between men and women is occupational segregation, that male-dominated jobs tend to pay more than female-dominated jobs. And there's been a lot of social science research over the past 20 years that has showed that even when you control for similar human capital requirements, so similar education levels, skill requirement, and training for male-dominated jobs and female-dominated jobs, male-dominated jobs still pay more. So this is the delivery truck that is paid on average $20 for a wage, and a nurse's aide that's only paid $17. Pretty comparable levels of education, training, skills, and yet male-dominated jobs tend to pay more. So this happens across the occupational hierarchy. So the other two buckets that I put are ideal worker norms. So there has been this uptick over the last 20 years of emphasizing always being on call, working long work hours. This is 50+ hours. This is traveling at a minute's notice, and always feeling like you need to be on. And so largely that's incompatible with those who have large care responsibilities. And because those tend to be women and people of color, that makes it more difficult for them to be able to meet these ideal worker norms. This is why the most people that are able to oftentimes meet these ideal worker norms are men who have access to the unpaid labor of their spouse. So spouse that is stay at home, works part-time, works full-time, but still does the majority of childcare and housework. And then the last bucket that many people are more familiar with is bias and discrimination. So we have a host of social science research to suggest that hiring discrimination is still present by gender and race. Promotion bias is still there. There's a really important meta-analysis that basically show that across over 150 studies that has shown that women on average, women and men earn similar performance evaluation scores, but women are consistently given less wages to that same performance evaluation score and deemed as less promotable. So two policies really quickly that I'll outline that many of you all are probably familiar with, that are focused more on what the federal government and many state governments are doing as well. The first is universally available childcare. This is really critical. We know that the states that have passed free K, so for 3- and 4-year-olds, have seen increases in women's employment. We see this at the country level. So Germany, Chile, England have all seen employment increases from women after they passed universal pre-K. And I would extend it to include childcare for also infants, because that's a critical time that we need high quality childcare for children. And then the other one is paid family leave. We have about 13 states now in the US that have passed it because of the benefits for gender equality, as well as bonding for children, for their infants, but it needs to be on this more national level, that it shouldn't be dependent on the state. And one last thing that I'll say about that, it has to be structured in a way that encourages men to take it. So right now in the US, 70% of men are back in their jobs after their wife or their partner has given birth. So 70% are back working 10 days later, less than 10 days. So we need to get more men involved with childcare immediately, because we know from other studies that if men are involved right away, they are more equitable partners, even 7 to 10 years later, and have much closer relationships with their children as well. That's borne out with a number of studies across different countries that have instituted paid leave. So paid leave and making sure that you structure in a way that encourages and incentivizes men to also use it.
Thank you, Dr. Jaworski. That's fascinating research, and really you highlighted the importance of state and federal policies and how they can address these inequalities. So thank you for sharing that. So Lieutenant Governor Stratton, I have a follow-up question for you. What are some other efforts or initiatives in Illinois that aim to promote women's educational attainment and pay parity, especially in male-dominated fields?
Well, first of all, let me just say I'm glad that some of what Dr. Yavorsky talked about are things that we are doing in Illinois. And so I was glad to hear that, but also look forward to learning more about ways to make sure that men are also taking advantage of things like paid leave, because that's a really interesting thought. When I think about not just what's happening at a state level or here in the United States, but really globally, speaking, we know that not just individuals, but entire countries benefit from girls being educated and women being educated. And in fact, there's a World Bank study that says that educated women are more likely to participate in the formal labor market and earn higher incomes. But as you've heard from all of the panelists today, including myself, there are lots of barriers, systemic barriers to that. We know that limited educational opportunities for girls, it says that it cost countries between 15 trillion and 30 trillion US dollars in lost lifetime productivity and earnings. And so as you've heard, we want more women to be in the workforce, and we want them to have educational attainment, and we want to remove those barriers. Exposure and access are both important when it comes to education. As I always say, and it's a saying that others say as well, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so we have to make sure that girls are seeing what is possible and that example of what's possible so they can imagine what's possible for themselves. So let me talk a little bit about what we are doing. As I mentioned, I'm the chair of the Illinois Council on Women and Girls. In 2023, kind of towards what I just said, you can't be what you can't see, we launched something called Girls Lead. And Girls Lead is really an opportunity to connect girls in our state from 5th grade through 12th grade with women in government, women legislators. Some shadowed me, but really just to give them an opportunity to see women working in government and directly interact with policymakers to understand that their voices are important in policy making too. And so that's one example of just ways, and to hear the girls after the program say, I didn't know how this happened. I didn't know that even if I wasn't old enough to vote, that my voice mattered in policymaking. I didn't know I had a say-so and that I belonged in the halls of our state capitol. And so we have to create more opportunities for exposure. We just heard about what happens after childbirth relating to women's employment and women dropping out of the workforce. And, here in Illinois, we know that educational parity or disparity starts early. And we have to not only think about what's happening in the workforce, but what are we doing with our youngest learners to prepare them for what can come, whether it's educational attainment or going into the workforce. We know that what we do as the child's brain is developing, that 0 through 5 years where the most brain development is happening, 90% of brain development is happening. That also plays a role in where we're going to see our girls end up. And so here in Illinois, we launched under the governor's leadership and with our partners in the General Assembly, Smart Start Illinois, doing exactly what we just talked about, free preschool for every 3 and 4-year-old in our state. We're seeking to end preschool deserts and childcare deserts in our state. We want to make sure that we not only have spaces so that we end childcare deserts, but also increase funding to childcare providers so that they can raise wages and quality in those facilities. There's too many, we know that those who are working in the early child care field are often women of color, Black and brown women, who are sometimes making wages that they could not send their child to the facility, but they're working in the facility, and we've got to do better with that. So our goal by 2027 is to end all child care deserts and to make sure that when families want to send their child to childcare, that there is a place for them to go and there are slots in those particular places, because we know that this also has an impact on women's financial health. We've offered free community college for those who are at or below the median income. And we have done some other things that we've talked about in this conversation. We raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. As of January of this year, it went up to $14 an hour. By this time next year, it will be $15 an hour. And we know that women represent 2/3 of the workforce in low-paid or low-wage jobs nationally. So this is going to have a tremendous impact specifically on women. We also passed and enacted the Paid Leave for All Workers Act, effective January 1 this year. Allows any working person to earn up to 40 hours of paid leave in a 12-month period, because we want to make sure that no one is punished for the unpredictability of life. And this directly supports caregivers. Women, we know, when we look at caregivers overall, 2/3 are women. And so this again will disproportionately impact women. Although again, I'll put that note, I want to know more about how we can encourage more men to also participate. And then I think just in general, just thinking about ways that we can advance educational opportunities. One of the things that I lead, and I'll close with this, is the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative. And we're really thinking about how we can reimagine our criminal legal system here in Illinois. And one of the ways that we are doing that is expanding access to education, higher education, for those who are in custody. So there's some work that's being done in partnership with some of our universities. But as a woman once told me, she said, I was in prison and then I went to prison. And what that means is, and what it meant to me, and that affected me deeply, was that there were some conditions and things that she had no access to in her community, that when she went into in one of our correctional facilities, it still did not feel like she was able to live as her best self. And so we need to do more to make sure that people have what they need, so that hopefully they will not end up in the system. But for those who are in the system, we can't forget about them and their needs for educational attainment as well. Because studies show that having a bachelor's degree that is attained while you are incarcerated reduces recidivism to 5%. And traditionally in Illinois, it's 43%. So this is a matter of public safety, and it's also a matter of making sure that all Illinoisans can continue to advance.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for sharing those innovative and impactful initiatives. You are right, exposure and access is key for our youth to be able to see and to aspire to know the different occupations that are out there for them as well. So we really appreciate you sharing those initiatives with us. And I think we will also probably will have links to these key resources that you're sharing, that everyone is sharing, in our key takeaways that we will be sending out after this recording. So thank you so much. Samantha, I have a question for you. So what kinds of wraparound services and supports would help uplift educational attainment for women of color?
Yes, and thank you so much. My wonderful panelists have shared a lot of great things already. And to add to the conversation, I would just emphasize, right, that when you have gender relations intersecting with race relations, or any other, issues you might face if you are identifying as one of many or many identities, all of that further confounds, right, the stress that you might feel when navigating complicated systems, or systems that are new to you. And of course, they'll be complicated that way. But yeah, it's so important to really know the communities you're serving and know them really well. And that all really starts from a conversation or an intentional relationship that you're building with them. For me, I am grateful that both of my parents really understood the value of education. And many years later, now I'm seeing how this has really kind of changed my family's life and my communities. But, not everyone has those same privileges. Not everyone has scholarships like I did, and other useful things like that. So it's very important that you get to know your community and create those holistic services that not only focus on the student in the classroom, but even what's happening at home, and really learn about maybe all of those things that they have been shouldering and carrying for many years, right? Because that is how they show up in the classroom. And if you're not able to connect with their background, their family's history, and all of that, you might truly be missing out, right, on helping them to see and fulfill all of their potential. I can't help but also think that we are in the age of technology, and access to equipment and internet is so crucial, especially and not only in rural communities, which North Carolina is full of rural communities. And so I really encourage people and organizations to do more work when it comes to increasing accessibility for folks to learn and get all the tools that they need to succeed. Um, and we have already heard about a lot of answers, right? But I guess a major takeaway would be to just start by asking, because your community is specific to you. So you can gather a lot of data and insight just by, starting off with a question. But for us, another thing that we see a lot with our community, not just community of women, right, but women of color, is that we are communal, and we do usually take action a little bit more quickly or sustainably if we're doing it alongside others, or have that trusted adult or resource to go to when we might be feeling scared or stuck, as we all do and many times in our life, or transitions through different careers and things like that. Um, and don't feel overwhelmed. It doesn't have to be this like formal coaching session or program that you're offering, right? But really lean on the power of informal networks. Whether it's your cousin or someone who studied with your family member, things like that. We tend to see that a lot of those people are the catalyst to just move someone along their path, right? Or get them to begin taking some of those giant leaps of faith and pursuing their dreams. Um, but another thing I guess I would like to say is that building relationships and partnerships from inside and outside of the school system is crucial, because a lot of times people have faith and trust in their local community center or nonprofit. And so it is a great opportunity for, a community college or institution to go and work with them intentionally to almost like expedite that process of building trust. Um, but we love to see and spotlight so many of our partners who are doing that, right? Community colleges that host information sessions, scholarship sessions at their local church or nonprofit. And beyond that, right, bring people to campus and then bring some of their culture and like uh, just different traditions that happen in community or in their home countries, and bring them to the classroom or to the campus. Like, that's such a beautiful thing to see, that may feel small, but really changes how people engage, right, with their educators and with their campus, whether it's for 4 years or any spectrum there. But yeah, I would also reiterate, right, the importance of daycare. I've seen people have childcare centers on campuses, even like innovative centers where people can come and grab some food, right, cook their meals, even do their laundry, y'all. Like, as we're seeing more and more, even like immigrant families come into North Carolina, I applaud those schools that are just thinking outside of the box and seeing, hey, how can we not only support the student, but their family, and make sure that, hey, if they look good, they feel good, right? Like, it's all tied together. But yeah, I guess I want to leave you all knowing that in order to open people up to learning and to advancing in their careers, you also have to like connect from the heart and build these spaces where they can really flourish and open up to learn and to be their best selves and to use their voice. And a lot of this takes courage. As you can imagine, it takes a student a lot of courage, especially if they're first generation, to do that. But we can't forget the educators too, right? Whether you identify as Latino or not, or identify as a person you're serving or not, it does take courage and vulnerability and honesty to connect and serve those people in a way that really honors them and fills those needs, right? In a very active way, not just passive. So yeah, I encourage you to take care of yourself and also invest in those people who are helping you to better serve the diverse people in your community.
Thank you so much, Samantha. What you said about the power of informal networks rings so true, especially when we're trying to help students to develop a sense of belonging there on campus. And when we typically speak about wraparound services, we are talking about academic services, but we also have to think about basic needs, which we're talking about, which is just as important when we're trying to uplift educational attainment for women of color. So thank you for shining light on that. So Dr. Jill Jaworski, I have a question for you. This is the final question. How can workplace and organizational policies support gender equality?
Yeah. So I really love this conversation so far. You're seeing so much about how solving gender equality isn't just one area, that this is about educational institutions and state policies and workplace and organizations coming together and designing systems that are more equitable. I advocate for companies to think about gender equality as an innovation challenge. Oftentimes we see companies implementing the same old practices to reduce gender inequality, like unconscious bias training, despite that it has really limited research of supporting any sort of long-term behavioral change by organizations. Or oftentimes, mentoring programs, which mentoring programs are really important, but we don't see the kind of innovation that companies oftentimes put forth toward other sects of their company or their products. So I would encourage employers to instead think about how bias might be built into the systems of work, the practices themselves, rather than just simply focusing on biases within individuals. How do we actually look at the systems and divide them, create them to be more gender neutral, to have more equitable outcomes for women and men? So to talk a little bit about, there's lots of different ways. You need to look at how equity is in a variety of different attainment processes. So hiring, promotion, the distribution of work, wages, and the rewards assigned to it. So for hiring, aiming for diverse slates for hiring and promotions. And when I say diverse slates, I actually mean diverse slates, right? Not putting a single woman in a male dominated job where it's one woman and 4 or 5 other male candidates, or one woman of color and all white men or white women. So it needs to actually be a diverse slate, because what we know from other research is that when you have a single token in a slate, you're necessarily guaranteeing that they're not going to get the job. So it really actually needs to be a more equal distribution of kind of talent out there. Target minority organizations to recruit when hiring, HBCUs, women colleges, professional organizations geared towards racial minorities or women. You could think about opening up the requirements that are unnecessary for performing the job. You could think about, for example, some tech jobs that might not require a formal computer science degree, that there's lots of other different tangential majors that might be applicable. That would actually open up the pipeline for underrepresented individuals in those occupations. For promotions, establishing clear ladders for upward mobility, particularly from women-dominated jobs. This is what I mean of, it's not just about making sure that men and women are equally promoted. That's really important, yes. But if women are stuck in jobs that do not have pathways upward, then there is no promotion to be had, right? So you actually have to make sure that how you're designing the jobs, that you need to look at whether women-dominated jobs have different pathways compared to the male-dominated jobs. and really work on integrating. Occupational segregation happens within the occupation level, but it also happens within organizations. That within organizations, women tend to be slotted into low status, low upwardly mobile jobs. And so that really needs to be on a company's radar and actively managed and fixed. One of the other thing is advocate for policies of transparency for managers' promotion and pay decisions. So there's a number of different studies that show that just the risk of assessment leads to more equitable decisions by managers. So if managers think that their ratings might be seen by other peer managers, they tend to evaluate people more equitably. And we know this from experimental studies in which we can control the performance of both the male and female candidate. Also, for ideal worker norms, we need to push against those. Organizations are really perpetuating these ideal worker norms, like I talked about, this utter commitment to work, working 50+ hours, that really favor a small group of individuals that don't have care responsibilities. And so companies can set more reasonable work responsibilities and limits. They can limit emails and meetings outside of, let's say, 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. if you think about childcare pickup times and school let-out times. Focus more on substantive results rather than face time. This is a huge one. And then the other thing that I would talk about is having opt-out policies related to family work. So right now, most of our family and work policies are opt-in. And so what it does is it oftentimes stigmatizes those workers who opt into those policies. And namely, those are caretakers, and namely, they're more likely to be women. And so if you have it as an opt-out, meaning that everybody automatically takes the full family paid leave that is offered in an organization. So men are automatically opted into that. If flexible work is viable, that workers are automatically slated into that flexible work rather than they have to opt in, and then therefore it stigmatizes their patterns. Another thing with the remote work is making sure that you're not, if there is a hybrid situation, that you're analyzing the data on who gets promoted, and that you're not just promoting still the people who are doing FaceTime or working on site. This is a really, really important thing to do, that as companies have been transitioning more to remote work, to make sure that we're not penalizing those who do. Because we know that racial minorities are much more likely to prefer and want to work remotely. And this is in part because of the greater microaggressions that they experience at work. And so this has implications for racial upward mobility as well as women's. So those are a few things. There's lots of different practices and policies. You could see that I wish that there was one policy that we could do, like just, like one shot, but it really needs to be equality, diversity, equity, inclusion really needs to be throughout the entire work system and attainment process within organizations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yavorski. Yes, if we could wave a magic wand and wave policy all across the nation and make changes, I'm sure we would, if it was that easy, right? And that simple. But thank you so much for that robust, rich conversation and all the information that you panelists have shared today. We have a few moments where we can accept questions out of the Q&A. So it looks like we have a few questions here. Let's see. Someone is saying, curious on thoughts to incentivize or support businesses to have childcare on site. Certainly, of course, this is based on proportion of workers needing it, but maybe there are hubs among businesses that are located within a certain radius. So does anyone have any thoughts to incentivize or support businesses to have childcare on site?
I don't know if I have specific, it's a good question. I don't think I have specific ideas on how to incentivize. I think it's a conversation that has to take place within the realities of, first of all, the shortage of childcare workers and what we need to do to continue to build that workforce. And I do know that, when we talk about not just affordable childcare, but quality childcare, there are a lot of businesses that, quite frankly, just would not have the capacity. But I think what you heard throughout this conversation is that there are other things that can be done, whether it's thinking about flexibility of the workday or thinking about how to support. I love the idea of sort of opt out instead of opt in, giving, offering benefits and saying this is the sort of menu of benefits that you have. And then if it's not necessary or wanted or needed, you can opt out of it. So I just think that there are more ways that, that we can foster innovation and thinking outside of the box about what are ways that we can support those efforts. When I talk about ending childcare deserts, I think it's important to do what we did here in Illinois, which is to figure out where do those centers exist. We too, like North Carolina, have a large rural population and geographic area, and people were driving 50 miles in one direction, and then maybe they had to go 50 miles in the other direction to get to work. Well, that's a childcare desert. And so we have to think about like how to map and make sure you have a good sense of where do those centers exist. I can't speak to what specifically might be needed to incentivize a business to do it, because there's a lot that goes into that. Having the workforce, the childcare workforce, making sure it could be quality and fits the standards, but also whether or not a business has the capacity. But for the many businesses that don't have the capacity, how can they work in partnership with state government or other entities to know where does child care exist? And if there's a child care desert, what can we do to make sure that we figure out ways that our employees can have the support that they need to be able to remain in the workforce, women employees in particular?
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. Want to see Dr. Yavorski, you have?
Yeah, I just want to say that I support everything that Lieutenant Governor Stratton said. I mean, it's a really, really complicated issue, and oftentimes too complicated for a single employer to be able to take on. One thing that employers could do is that they could make it as part of their benefit package, that like they have support, they could do subsidies where they offer employees $12,000 a year. As long as, I want to preface this, as long as they're not taking it from their pay. So this is the risk, is that companies would just lower their wages. And so it looks like they're offering this great support, but really their wages are now lower, which can have a long-term trajectory outcome for individuals, workers. So a subsidy is something, but really I think that this needs to be handled at the state and federal level of figuring out the childcare issue, because as Lieutenant Governor Stratton mentioned, is that it's not just about affording it, it's being able to have access to it, because of deserts are so prevalent across many, many states.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yavorski. It looks like we have time for one final question here. Does the funding stream for child care initiatives, are they both state and federal supplemental funds?
Well, I will not get into the complexities of these different funding streams, but I can say that the word complexity really does apply. There are lots of different funding streams, state, federal, and one of the things that we did here in Illinois to make it less burdensome on parents as well as providers is we are streamlining and creating one entity within the state. Because before, if you needed to find the different programs and support and what resources were available, what funding resources were available, you had to go to a number of different websites or a number of different agencies. And so what we are working on, and we're just in the early stages, we announced it in the latter part of last year, the governor did, but we are trying to kind of move all of that to one central location so that that information can be streamlined, and anyone who needs that information, because depending on the funding source, it's around, whether it's, it could be a number of, I won't get into the different types of programs, but each program has its own funding stream, but they aren't always sort of in alignment. And so we are doing that here in Illinois to make it easier on both providers as well as parents who might need those resources.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Stratton, for sharing that information So as we finish the session, I would like to thank you all for participating, especially our panelists. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your insight and expertise. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the Hunt Institute will also share the recording and key takeaways in the coming weeks. I would also like to spotlight the Hunt Institute's upcoming webinar on March 14th at 2:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, titled Post-Secondary Pathways, Aligning Higher Education Curriculum with Workforce Needs. So please register for that webinar that's coming up in March 14th. And again, I want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon or morning, wherever you are. So thank you so much.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.